There is a type of person that Marcus Aurelius spent considerable time thinking about. A person who treats those around them as instruments rather than human beings, who manipulates, diminishes, and extracts, and then, when confronted, looks genuinely confused about what they have done wrong. The modern world has given this person a name. Marcus Aurelius did not have that name, but he understood the phenomenon with a precision that most contemporary psychology has not matched, and more importantly, he had a system for dealing with them. If you have ever been in a sustained relationship with a narcissistic person, a parent, a partner, a colleague, a friend, you will have noticed something peculiar. Ordinary tools do not work. Reasoning with them does not work. Appealing to their empathy does not work. Setting clear expectations does not work. Even distance, the one thing you would think would create relief, often generates a fresh cycle of drama, guilt, or charm. Most modern advice on the subject tells you what to do. Leave, set boundaries, go no contact, gray rock. All of this can be useful, but none of it answers the deeper question that haunts people who have been through this kind of relationship. Why? Why do they behave this way? Why does reasoning fail? Why does empathy not land? Why does your own pain seem to register as nothing, or worse, as ammunition? The Stoics asked a version of this question 2,000 years ago, and the answer they arrived at is one of the most clarifying, and in some ways most sobering, insights in the history of philosophy. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire from 161 to 180 AD. He was, by every account, a man who took philosophy seriously, not as an intellectual exercise but as a daily practice for navigating a world full of difficult people, impossible demands, and relentless pressure. His private journal, which we now call the Meditations, was never intended for publication. It was a set of instructions he wrote to himself, a document of continuous self-correction. And throughout it, he returns again and again to a particular challenge. What do you do with people who appear to be incapable of reason? Who act solely from appetite, ego, and self-interest? Whose behavior causes harm, but who seem genuinely unable to understand that they are causing it? The Stoic framework for understanding such people begins with a concept called the rational faculty. For the Stoics, every human being possesses what they call the hegemonikon, the rational, governing part of the soul. This is the part that allows us to make judgments, to weigh consequences, to see beyond our immediate impulses. It is the part, Epictetus argued, that no one can take from you. The Stoics also recognized that this faculty could be damaged, corrupted, stunted, not by external force, but by habit, by choices made over time, by a life lived entirely in service of the ego at the expense of genuine reflection. The impediment to the rational faculty, Marcus wrote, is its own impediment. Nothing outside can break what is inside unless we allow it. What the Stoics were describing, in their language, maps with striking precision onto what modern psychology calls narcissistic personality structure. A governing faculty so consumed by the need to maintain a particular self-image that it cannot, without tremendous effort, register the legitimate inner reality of another person. The first thing Marcus Aurelius understood about people governed entirely by ego is that they are not withholding connection, empathy, or recognition out of cruelty. They genuinely do not have access to it. This is perhaps the hardest truth for people who have loved a narcissistic person to accept, because the natural human response to someone who hurts you is to believe they could choose differently, and are simply choosing not to. Marcus writes, "Do not indulge in anger at those who have wronged you. They acted according to their nature. A fig tree does not produce pomegranates. The wolf does not choose to be a wolf." This is not a call to accept abuse. It is a call to stop expecting a fig tree to produce pomegranates. The pain of a narcissistic relationship is often compounded by the belief that if you could just explain things correctly, clearly enough, with enough emotion, they would finally understand. They would change. The Stoic answer is uncomfortable. They may not have the inner architecture for that understanding, not because they are evil, but because they are missing something. The second thing Marcus understood, is that emotional reactivity gives a manipulative person exactly what they require. In Book 6 of the Meditations, he writes, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." This principle has a direct and practical application in the context of a narcissistic relationship. A person whose sense of self is built on dominance, on being the most important person in any room, is fundamentally dependent on your emotional response. Your anger validates their power. Your distress confirms their centrality. Your attempts to reason with them give them a stage. The Stoic practice of the untroubled spirit, what the Greeks called ataraxia, is not indifference. It is not coldness. It is the deliberate refusal to let another person's disordered inner world become the weather inside your own. Modern psychology arrived at the same conclusion through a different door and called it the gray rock method. The Stoics had been practicing it for 500 years before the Roman Empire existed. The most famous concept in Stoic philosophy, and the one most directly relevant to this subject, is what Marcus Aurelius called the inner citadel. The idea is this: there is a part of you that no person, no circumstance, no relationship can touch without your consent. Your judgments, your values, your response to what happens to you. A narcissistic person can damage your reputation. They can influence your finances, your relationships, your professional life. In the most extreme cases, they can damage your physical safety. What they cannot do without your cooperation is determine what those events mean to you, how you interpret them, who you decide to become in response. Marcus writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is not a passive teaching. It is a call to active psychological sovereignty. Every time you allow someone else's behavior to define your sense of worth, your identity, your understanding of reality, you have handed them the keys to the citadel. Every time you refuse to let their narrative become your narrative, you have taken them back. The fourth and most counterintuitive thing Marcus Aurelius knew about people like this is perhaps the most useful. He did not advise hatred. He did not advise contempt. He advised something that initially sounds almost offensive to people who have been genuinely hurt. He advised pity, not the pity of superiority, the pity of clear sight. Because if you look honestly at what it means to be a person entirely trapped inside their own self-image, unable to form genuine connections, unable to experience the particular kind of peace that comes from real intimacy, unable to grow because growth requires the admission of error, what you see is not a monster. What you see is a prison. Marcus writes in Book 2, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are this way because they cannot tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This is not an instruction to forgive, to forget, or to remain in harm's way. It is an instruction about where to place your attention. Anger chains you to the person who wronged you. Pity allows you to see them clearly, and then turn your attention back toward your own life." So what does the Stoic understanding of this type of person actually change? It changes what you expect from them. When you stop expecting a fig tree to produce pomegranates, when you genuinely internalize that their behavior is not a choice directed at you personally, but a symptom of who they are, a particular kind of suffering dissolves. Not all suffering. The grief of having been hurt remains. The practical consequences of the relationship remain. But the second layer of pain, the layer built on the belief that their behavior means something about your worth, that if you had just explained it better, they would have understood, that somewhere inside them is the person you hope for. That layer can be dismantled. It also changes what you protect. The inner citadel is not a metaphor. It is a daily practice of returning to your own judgments, your own values, your own sense of reality, especially when someone with a strong will is trying to substitute their version of events for yours. The Stoics would call this practice of remembering who you are the return to yourself. And perhaps above all, it changes where your energy goes. The Stoics were not interested in explaining difficult people. They were interested in building the kind of inner life that made difficult people, eventually, irrelevant. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and still found time to write about the people who drained him. That alone should tell you something. Not that he was weak, but that this is simply part of what it means to live among human beings. The Stoic response to the narcissistic personality is not a technique, it is a posture. See them clearly. Expect nothing they cannot give. Protect the citadel. Return to yourself, over and over if necessary, until it is no longer necessary.